What if I told you that your desperate struggle to organize the chaos of life is exactly what's creating more chaos? Imagine for a moment that you're standing in a turbulent river, trying to grasp the water with your bare hands. The harder you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. The more you fight against the current, the more it drags you under. And then, in a moment of exhausted surrender, a quiet revelation emerges from the depths. What if the water was never your enemy? Picture yourself sitting by that same river now, but this time you're not fighting, you're watching. The water moves with an intelligence that needs no instruction, no control, no management from you. It finds its way around rocks, through valleys, always flowing towards something greater than itself. Alan Watts whispered this truth to us decades ago. You are something the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. But we've forgotten this. We've forgotten that we are the dance, not the dancer trying to choreograph every movement. Tonight, we're going to walk together through the most beautiful and terrifying paradox of human existence: how to embrace chaos without losing ourselves in it. How to find order within disorder. How to discover that perhaps there was never anything to control in the first place. We'll explore why our modern minds have become addicted to the illusion of predictability, why uncertainty has become our greatest teacher, and how the very chaos we fear might be the doorway to a life more alive than we ever imagined possible. This isn't about giving up or becoming passive. This isn't about resignation or spiritual bypassing. This is about discovering a different kind of strength, a different kind of wisdom, a different way of moving through the world that doesn't require you to exhaust yourself trying to orchestrate outcomes that were never yours to control. It's about learning to surf the waves of existence rather than drowning in the attempt to calm every storm. The ancient Taoists understood something we've lost in our rush towards certainty and security. They knew that the most powerful force in nature isn't the hardest or the strongest, but the most adaptable. Water, they observed, is soft and yielding, yet it can carve through the hardest stone given enough time. It doesn't fight the mountain. It finds a way around it, through it, or simply waits for the mountain to crumble under its own weight. This is the paradox we're going to explore together. How yielding can be the ultimate strength, how acceptance can be the most revolutionary act, and how chaos might be life's way of teaching us to dance. Look around you right now, wherever you are. Notice how everything in your environment exists in a state of constant flux. The air you're breathing is moving, circulating, changing. The light is shifting, even if imperceptibly. Your body is aging, healing, regenerating at the cellular level. Your thoughts are arising and dissolving like clouds in an endless sky. Change isn't something that happens to you. Change is what you are. And yet, we spend so much of our energy trying to create pockets of permanence in a universe that is pure movement. This resistance to change, this desperate grasping for control, creates what we might call the fundamental friction of human existence. It's the tension between what we think life should be and what life actually is. It's the exhaustion that comes from swimming upstream against the current of reality. It's the anxiety that emerges when we try to be the director of a cosmic play in which we're actually just one of the actors. And here's what's most beautiful and heartbreaking about this predicament. We're not victims of chaos. We are chaos, learning to recognize itself. Carl Jung observed something profound about the nature of the human psyche that he called enantiodromia, the tendency for any extreme position to eventually transform into its opposite. The person who tries to control everything eventually collapses into helplessness. The one who avoids all responsibility eventually becomes overwhelmed by the weight of their choices. The one who seeks perfect order eventually finds themselves surrounded by chaos. It's as if the universe has a sense of humor, or perhaps a deeper wisdom about balance that our conscious minds can't quite grasp. This principle extends far beyond individual psychology. Look at nature itself. Forest fires, which appear destructive and chaotic, actually serve to clear undergrowth and create space for new growth. Economic recessions, as painful as they are, often eliminate inefficiencies and create opportunities for innovation. Personal crises, those dark nights of the soul we all experience, frequently precede our most significant breakthroughs and transformations. What if chaos isn't the enemy of order, but rather its dance partner in an eternal waltz of creation and destruction? But here's where most of us get trapped. We interpret this dance as evidence that life is random, meaningless, or hostile. We see the chaos and conclude that we must fight harder, control more, protect ourselves from the unpredictability of existence. We build walls of routine, towers of plans, fortresses of expectations, all in an attempt to create islands of certainty in an ocean of change. And then we wonder why we feel so isolated, so disconnected from the very life force that animates everything around us. The tragedy isn't that life is chaotic. The tragedy is that we've been taught to fear chaos instead of learning to dance with it. We've been conditioned to see uncertainty as threat rather than possibility, change as loss rather than renewal, dissolution as death rather than transformation. This conditioning runs so deep that we often don't even recognize it as conditioning. We think it's just reality, just the way things are, just the burden of being human. Consider for a moment the way your mind works when faced with uncertainty. Perhaps you're waiting for medical test results, or job interview feedback, or a difficult conversation with someone you love. Notice how your thoughts immediately begin trying to control the uncontrollable. You rehearse conversations that may never happen. Imagine scenarios that exist only in your mind. Prepare for futures that are entirely fabricated. This isn't planning. This is the ego's desperate attempt to maintain the illusion that it's in charge of a reality that is fundamentally beyond its control. And here's the beautiful irony. While your mind is busy trying to manage imaginary futures, the present moment, the only place where life actually exists, slips by unnoticed. You're so focused on controlling what's coming that you miss what's here. You're so busy preparing for the wave that you forget you're already in the ocean. This is what Alan Watts meant when he spoke about the pathless path. There is nowhere to arrive because you're already here. There's nothing to achieve because you're already complete. There's nothing to control because you are the very force you're trying to control. But the mind rebels against this understanding. It says, if I don't plan, if I don't worry, if I don't prepare, then surely everything will fall apart. And yet, how often have your worst fears actually materialized? How many of the catastrophes you've spent sleepless nights imagining have ever come to pass? How much of your suffering has been caused by events that never happened outside the theater of your own mind? This isn't to suggest that planning is unnecessary or that we should become passive observers of our lives. Quite the opposite. When we stop wasting energy trying to control outcomes, we have more energy available for skillful action. When we stop fighting the current, we can see more clearly where the river is flowing and navigate accordingly. When we stop resisting what is, we become available for what could be. The ancient Chinese had a concept called Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with the natural flow of circumstances rather than against it. It's the difference between swimming with the current and swimming against it, between working with the grain of the wood and working against it, between cooperating with life and battling it at every turn. Imagine a master martial artist facing an opponent. They don't meet force with force, creating a collision that could injure both parties. Instead, they redirect the opponent's energy, using the force of the attack to create their own response. The opponent's aggression becomes part of the solution. Their resistance becomes the very thing that resolves the conflict. This is Wu Wei in action. Not passivity, but intelligent responsiveness. Not giving up, but giving in to what wants to emerge. Now apply this principle to your daily life. When you encounter resistance, whether in relationships, work, or personal challenges, what would it look like to work with the resistance rather than against it? What if the obstacle wasn't something to overcome, but something to dance with? What if the very thing you're fighting is trying to teach you something essential about the art of being alive? This shift in perspective requires what we might call a fundamental reorientation of consciousness. Instead of seeing yourself as separate from the chaos of life, trying to manage it from the outside, you begin to recognize yourself as an expression of the same creative force that moves the stars, grows the forests, and beats your heart without any conscious effort on your part. You're not the conductor trying to control the orchestra. You're one instrument in a symphony that's composing itself as it plays. This recognition doesn't come from thinking about it intellectually. It comes from a direct, experiential understanding that emerges when you stop trying so hard to figure everything out. It's like trying to see your own eyes. The harder you look, the more elusive they become. But relax, find a mirror, and there they are, looking back at you with an intelligence that needs no explanation. The neuroscientist would tell us that our brains are prediction machines, constantly trying to model future scenarios to keep us safe from potential threats. This was useful when our ancestors faced immediate physical dangers. But in our modern world, this same mechanism often creates suffering where none needs to exist. We predict problems that never materialize, imagine threats that exist only in our minds, and live in a state of chronic preparation for disasters that are largely fictional. But what if we could use this predictive capacity differently? What if, instead of imagining worst-case scenarios, we could envision multiple possibilities and hold them all lightly? What if we could plan without attachment to the plan? Prepare without anxiety about the outcome, hope without clinging to specific results? This is the art of conscious uncertainty, remaining open to whatever wants to emerge while taking skillful action in the present moment. The mystics throughout history have pointed to the same understanding using different language. They speak of surrender, of letting go, of dying before death. But what are they really talking about? They're talking about the death of the illusion that you're separate from life, that you're in control of forces beyond your influence, that your worth depends on your ability to orchestrate outcomes. This death isn't a loss. It's a homecoming. It's the recognition that you were never separate from the creative force of the universe in the first place. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most alive, most connected, most at peace. Were these moments characterized by control and predictability, or by a sense of flow, of being carried by something larger than your individual will? Perhaps it was during creative expression, when ideas seemed to flow through you rather than from you. Perhaps it was in nature, when you felt held by something vast and benevolent. Perhaps it was in deep conversation, when words arose spontaneously and perfectly without your having to plan them. These experiences offer us glimpses of what life could be like if we learn to trust the intelligence that's already operating through us. Not the intelligence of the rational mind, though that has its place, but the deeper intelligence that grows your hair, heals your wounds, and dreams your dreams without any conscious effort on your part. This is the intelligence that moves the entire cosmos, and it's the same intelligence that's reading these words right now through your eyes. But here's where we often get trapped in spiritual bypassing. We think that accepting chaos means becoming passive, that surrendering control means abandoning responsibility, that going with the flow means floating aimlessly without direction or purpose. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what conscious acceptance actually entails. True acceptance includes accepting your own desires for growth, change, and contribution. It includes accepting your responsibility to respond skillfully to whatever circumstances arise. The paradox is that when you stop trying to control outcomes, you often find yourself able to influence them more effectively. When you stop forcing solutions, creative possibilities you never considered begin to emerge. When you stop pushing so hard against the doors that appear closed, you notice the windows that were always open. This isn't magic. It's simply what happens when you work with the natural intelligence of life rather than against it. Consider the way a tree grows. It doesn't fight against the wind. It bends with it, becoming stronger and more flexible in the process. It doesn't resist the changing seasons. It participates in them, shedding leaves when it's time to let go, budding new growth when conditions are right. It doesn't struggle against drought or flood. It adapts, sending roots deeper or growing toward the light as needed. The tree doesn't control its environment, but it responds to it with an intelligence that ensures not just survival, but flourishing. This is the model of conscious chaos. Not passive resignation, but active participation in the dance of existence. It's about developing the sensitivity to know when to act and when to wait, when to push forward and when to step back, when to hold on and when to let go. It's about trusting that the same intelligence that guides the tree, the river, and the changing seasons is also available to guide your own life if you learn to listen for it. The challenge for most of us is that we've been conditioned to trust only the intelligence of the rational mind, which, while useful for certain tasks, is fundamentally limited in its ability to navigate the full complexity of human existence. The rational mind excels at analysis, planning, and problem-solving within defined parameters. But life rarely operates within defined parameters. Life is messy, paradoxical, unpredictable, and often irrational in the most beautiful ways. This is why purely rational approaches to life often leave us feeling empty or frustrated. We can plan every detail of our day, optimize every system, control every variable we can identify, and still find ourselves confronted with the unexpected, the unplanned, the uncontrollable. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can see these disruptions as failures of our planning, or we can see them as invitations to dance with the spontaneous creativity of existence. The ancient Taoists had a saying, "The sage does not attempt anything very big and thus achieves greatness." This isn't about thinking small or limiting our vision. It's about recognizing that the most profound transformations often happen through small, consistent adjustments rather than dramatic overhauls. It's about understanding that real change occurs organically from the inside out rather than through force or manipulation. When you try to change too much too quickly, you often create resistance, both within yourself and in your environment. But when you make small adjustments in alignment with what wants to naturally emerge, you create momentum that builds on itself. It's like steering a large ship. You don't jerk the wheel dramatically from side to side. You make small, steady corrections that gradually alter the course over time. This principle applies to every area of life. In relationships, instead of trying to change your partner or dramatically alter the dynamic overnight, you might focus on changing your own responses, your own presence, your own way of showing up. In work, instead of trying to revolutionize your entire career in one bold move, you might begin by bringing more consciousness to whatever you're already doing, finding ways to align your current activities with your deeper values and interests. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it reduces the resistance that inevitably arises when we try to force change. When you work with the natural flow of circumstances, when you make adjustments that feel organic rather than imposed, you often find that transformation happens more easily and sustainably than when you try to muscle your way through obstacles. But this requires developing a different relationship with time itself. Our culture is obsessed with speed, with immediate results, with instant gratification. We want to solve problems quickly, achieve goals rapidly, and see changes overnight. This impatience creates enormous stress and often prevents us from noticing the subtle shifts that are already occurring. Real transformation, like the growth of a tree or the changing of seasons, happens according to its own timeline, not according to our preferences or demands. Learning to embrace chaos means learning to trust the timing of your own unfolding. It means recognizing that you're not behind schedule, that you haven't missed your opportunity, that you're not falling short of some imaginary standard of progress. You're exactly where you need to be, even if where you are feels uncomfortable, uncertain, or incomplete. This moment, with all its imperfections and unknowns, is the only moment in which transformation can actually occur. This understanding can be profoundly liberating, but it can also be challenging for the part of us that wants to be in control. The ego thrives on the illusion of progress, on the feeling that it's getting somewhere, accomplishing something, moving toward a better future. When we begin to embrace the present moment as it is, including its chaos and uncertainty, the ego can feel threatened. It might generate anxiety, depression, or resistance as a way of trying to maintain its familiar patterns of seeking and striving. This is where compassion becomes essential, both for ourselves and for the part of us that's afraid to let go. The ego isn't the enemy. It's a part of our psyche that developed to help us navigate the world, to create a sense of identity and continuity in the face of constant change. But like a protective parent who continues to hover over a child who's grown into an adult, the ego sometimes doesn't know when to step back and allow life to unfold naturally. We can honor the ego's concerns while not being controlled by them. We can acknowledge the fear without being paralyzed by it. We can appreciate the mind's desire to plan and control while not becoming enslaved to those plans or devastated when control proves impossible. This is the middle way, neither suppressing our human desires nor being tyrannized by them. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chödrön speaks about this as learning to be comfortable with groundlessness, with not knowing, with the fundamental uncertainty that characterizes human existence. She suggests that most of our suffering comes from trying to find solid ground in a reality that is inherently fluid. We want guarantees that don't exist, certainties that aren't available, securities that are fundamentally impossible in a universe of constant change. But what if groundlessness isn't something to fear? What if uncertainty isn't the enemy of peace but rather its birthplace? What if the very thing we're running from is actually what we're running toward? But we don't recognize it because we've been taught to see it through the lens of fear rather than wonder? Consider the space between thoughts, the pause between breaths, the silence between words. This isn't empty space. It's pregnant with potential, alive with possibility, rich with a creative force from which all experience emerges. This is the chaos we fear, not disorder, but pure creative potential before it takes form. Not randomness, but infinite possibility before it crystallizes into specific outcomes. When you begin to recognize chaos in this way, as the source rather than the enemy of order, something fundamental shifts in your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of bracing against the unknown, you begin to lean into it with curiosity. Instead of trying to predict and control what's coming, you become interested in discovering what wants to emerge. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances beyond your control, you recognize yourself as a conscious participant in the creative unfolding of reality. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't mean you'll never feel anxiety or fear in the face of uncertainty. You're human, and humans are wired to notice potential threats and prepare for them. But you can learn to hold these natural responses with awareness rather than being swept away by them. You can feel the fear without becoming the fear. Experience the anxiety without identifying with it. Notice the desire to control without being compelled to act on it. This is the practice of conscious chaos, developing the capacity to remain present and responsive in the face of uncertainty, to stay open and curious when the mind wants to close down and defend, to continue dancing even when you can't hear the music clearly. It's not about becoming indifferent or disconnected. It's about becoming more sensitive, more aware, more attuned to the subtle rhythms and flows that are always present but often overlooked in our rush to impose order on life. The mystic Rumi understood this deeply when he wrote about becoming comfortable with not knowing. He saw uncertainty not as a problem to be solved, but as a doorway to be walked through, not as evidence of personal inadequacy, but as an invitation to trust something larger than individual understanding. This trust isn't blind faith. It's an educated confidence based on repeated experience of life's fundamental benevolence and intelligence. Look back at your own life with this perspective. Think about the times when your plans fell apart, when your expectations were shattered, when you were forced to navigate uncharted territory. How many of those experiences, as challenging as they were in the moment, ultimately led to growth, learning, or opportunities you couldn't have imagined beforehand? How often has life surprised you with gifts that arrived disguised as problems? This doesn't mean that all suffering is meaningful or that every difficulty serves a purpose. Pain is real, loss is real, injustice is real. But it does suggest that our relationship with these experiences can transform them from sources of pure suffering into catalysts for wisdom, compassion, and resilience. When we stop seeing ourselves as victims of chaos and start recognizing ourselves as conscious participants in it, we discover resources and capabilities we didn't know we possessed. The alchemists of old understood this principle in their attempts to transform base metals into gold. But the real transformation wasn't about changing physical substances. It was about changing consciousness itself. The true gold was the awareness that could remain stable and clear in the face of any experience, that could find beauty in breakdown, meaning in meaninglessness, order in apparent disorder. This alchemical consciousness is what emerges when we learn to embrace chaos consciously. We discover that we're not separate from the creative force of the universe, but rather its conscious expression. We're not victims of change, but its willing participants. We're not at the mercy of circumstances, but capable of dancing with whatever arises in ways that serve not just our own well-being, but the well-being of the whole. And as we near the end of our exploration together, perhaps you're beginning to sense that this isn't really about chaos at all. It's about coming home to yourself, to the part of you that has always been comfortable with uncertainty, because it knows itself to be the very source from which both chaos and order emerge. It's about remembering that you're not a separate entity trying to survive in a hostile universe, but rather the universe itself, experiencing what it's like to be temporarily focused through the lens of human consciousness. Alan Watts spoke of this as the cosmic game of hide and seek, where the infinite consciousness that you truly are pretends to be a limited individual who has forgotten its true nature. The fear of chaos, the need to control, the anxiety about the future, these are all part of the game, part of the cosmic drama in which consciousness explores what it means to experience limitation, separation, and eventual awakening to its own unlimited nature. From this perspective, even your resistance to chaos serves a purpose. It's not a mistake or a failure. It's consciousness exploring what it feels like to believe in separation, to experience fear, to struggle against its own creative expressions. And when you're ready, when you fully experience that particular aspect of the game, you naturally begin to remember who you really are, not the character in the story, but the awareness in which all stories arise and dissolve. This remembering doesn't usually happen as a sudden, dramatic awakening, though it can. More often, it's a gradual recognition, a slow dawning, a gentle coming home to what you've always known but temporarily forgotten. It's like waking up from a dream. One moment you're completely identified with the dream character, fully believing in the dream reality, and the next moment you recognize that you were the dreamer all along. But here's the beautiful paradox. Even after this recognition dawns, you don't necessarily stop dreaming. You might continue to play the role of a human being navigating the apparent chaos of existence. But now you know it's a role, a game, a creative expression of your infinite nature. The drama continues, but you're no longer completely lost in it. You can appreciate the story without forgetting that you're the storyteller. This is the ultimate embrace of chaos. Recognizing that what appears as disorder from one perspective is perfect order from another. That what seems like random chance is actually intelligent creativity. That what feels like meaningless suffering is part of a cosmic symphony too vast and complex for the individual mind to comprehend fully. You don't need to understand it all. You just need to trust your role in it, to play your part with full commitment while holding lightly to any particular outcome. And so we return to where we began, to the image of standing by the river, no longer fighting the current but simply watching, witnessing, participating in the eternal flow that connects all things. The water moves as it always has, following laws both visible and invisible, serving purposes both known and mysterious. And you are both the observer and the observed, the dancer and the dance, the chaos learning to recognize itself as order, the order discovering its infinite creativity through apparent disorder. The music never stops playing. The dance never truly ends. And you, beautiful expression of cosmic consciousness that you were never separate from any of it. Welcome home to the chaos that is your truest nature, to the order that needs no management, to the dance that has been dancing you all along. In this moment right now, can you feel it? The aliveness that doesn't need to be controlled. The intelligence that requires no management from you. The love that flows through everything, including your own apparent resistance to it. This is not something you need to achieve or attain. This is what you are, what you've always been, what you could never not be. Even in your most chaotic, uncertain, beautifully human moments, the river flows, the heart beats, the breath breathes itself. And somewhere in the space between control and surrender, between knowing and not knowing, between chaos and order, you discover that you are the very awareness in which all these apparent opposites dance together in perfect, eternal, ever-changing harmony.